The stagecoach rattled to a halt in a cloud of dust, its wheels groaning like an old man's bones. Margaret stepped down carefully, her gloved hands tight on the railing. Her heart thudded in her chest as her boots touched the packed dirt street. She scanned the crowd. Women bustled with baskets. Men leaned against hitching posts. Horses flicked their tails. But no one looked at her with recognition. She cleared her throat and called out softly, "Mr. Thompson?" No answer. Her cheeks warmed under the hot afternoon sun. She clutched her suitcase tighter. Maybe he was just late. Surely he wouldn't forget the very day his bride was to arrive. Minutes passed. The stagecoach driver tipped his hat politely, then climbed back aboard and drove off, leaving Margaret alone in a swirl of dust. By the time the street was clear again, her hope had thinned to nothing. Margaret tried not to notice the eyes on her. A group of men outside the saloon nudged each other and smirked. Two women near the mercantile whispered behind their hands. She straightened her back, refusing to cry. If she cried, they would know she'd been abandoned. Her stomach twisted. Where would she sleep tonight? Where would she go if no one claimed her? A man with a gray beard and kind eyes, the livery owner perhaps, stepped closer. "You looking for someone, miss?" "Yes," she said, forcing a smile. "Mr. Henry Thompson. I am his bride." The man's expression softened with pity. "Henry passed 2 weeks back. Pneumonia took him." The words hit like a hammer. The town blurred for a moment. She swallowed hard. I see. Now she was not just alone. She was a widow before she'd even been a wife. "Need somewhere to stay?" a deep voice asked. Margaret turned. A tall cowboy stood a few paces away, hat shadowing his eyes, shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow. He looked at her without pity, just calm, steady watchfulness. I don't know," she stammered. "I have nowhere to go." He nodded once, as if that settled it. "I've got a spare room on my ranch. You're welcome to it till you figure things out." Margaret hesitated. "I can't accept charity." "Not charity," he said simply. "Just a roof." She searched his face. He wasn't smiling, but something about his voice, quiet, firm, made her believe him. "All right," she whispered. The ranch was simple, a small house, a barn, wide open sky. Margaret cooked her own meals, mended her dresses, tried to stay out of the cowboy's way. But she noticed him. How he rose before dawn. How his hands were rough but gentle when he worked with the horses. How he never looked at her too long but always made sure she had what she needed. One evening, she sat on the porch, tears pricking her eyes. "You miss him?" he asked quietly from where he leaned against the post. "I didn't even know him," she said. "But I hate feeling unwanted, like I came all this way for nothing." His jaw tightened. "You ain't nothing." It was the kindest thing anyone had ever said to her. One night, a ranch hand who had been drinking too much cornered Margaret near the barn. "Such a pretty little thing," he slurred, reaching for her arm. Before Margaret could scream, the cowboy was there, pulling the man away, knocking him into the dirt. "Pack your things," he growled to the ranch hand. "You're done here." When he turned back to Margaret, his eyes softened. "You all right?" She nodded, shaken. "Why do you care so much?" He hesitated, then said quietly, "Because I don't want to see you hurt." The next Sunday, Margaret stood in front of the church again, the same spot where she'd first felt abandoned. This time, she wasn't alone. The cowboy stood beside her, hat in hand. "I never planned to marry," he admitted, "but I can't picture my days without you in them." Margaret's breath caught. "Are you asking?" He nodded once, a faint smile at the corner of his mouth. "Yes," she said softly. And just like that, she had a home, and someone to share it with. The Sunday sun was just cresting over the hills when Margaret stood in the quiet churchyard with him. He held his hat against his chest. "Guess we ought to start with names," he said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "I'm Eli." "Margaret," she replied softly, though he already knew. Eli nodded. "Margaret. Seems fitting I call you that proper, seeing as I just asked you to marry me." She laughed, startled by the sound after so many hard weeks. It felt good. Inside the church, the preacher's wife peeked through the window, watching them with a knowing smile. "I don't need a fancy wedding," Margaret said. "I just need you to mean it." "I mean it," Eli said simply. And for the first time, Margaret believed she belonged somewhere. The following weeks were full of hard work and quiet joy. Margaret learned to milk cows before sunrise, to sweep the porch until it gleamed, to bake biscuits that Eli said were just about perfect. Sometimes he'd come in from the fields, dusty and tired, and find her humming while kneading bread. His lips would twitch like he wanted to smile but didn't quite know how. At night, they sat by the fire. Eli told her stories of the land, how the creek ran wild one year, how he nearly lost a calf in a winter storm. One evening, Margaret said softly, "You're different than I thought you'd be." Eli glanced at her. "Different how?" "You don't talk much," she said. "But when you do, it matters." That night, he stayed a little longer by the fire. Their peace didn't last. One hot afternoon, a man in a fine suit rode up, his shiny boots stirring the dust. "Afternoon," he called. "Name's Cartwright. Your ranch note is due. You have 2 weeks to pay in full, or it's mine." Margaret's stomach dropped. She glanced at Eli, who stood calm and still as a fence post. "You'll get your money," Eli said evenly. Cartwright smirked. "See that I do." When he rode off, Margaret touched Eli's arm. "Can we pay him?" Eli hesitated, then shook his head. "Not yet, but we will." Margaret looked toward the barn, heart heavy. She had found a home, and now it might be taken away. Margaret surprised herself with how hard she worked over the next 2 weeks. She rose before dawn to gather eggs, churned butter to sell in town, even helped mend fences. One night, Eli found her still working by lantern light. "You don't have to do all this," he said quietly. "Yes, I do," Margaret replied, meeting his gaze. "This is my home too." For a long moment he just looked at her. Really looked. Then he took the lantern from her hand and said softly, "Come sit with me." They sat on the porch steps under a spray of stars. Eli's shoulder brushed hers. "You make me think about things I swore I'd never have," he admitted. "Like a family." Margaret's throat tightened. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. On the morning the note was due, Eli and Margaret rode into town together. Cartwright was waiting outside the saloon. "You have my money?" he drawled. Eli swung down from his horse and handed him a heavy pouch. "Every cent." Cartwright opened it, counted, and scowled. "Fine. Keep your dusty land." When he rode off, Margaret let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Eli glanced at her, and for the first time he smiled, a real, easy smile that reached his eyes. Margaret felt her heart do a funny little flip. A week later, Margaret stood in front of the little church again, but this time in a fresh blue dress she'd sewn herself. The preacher spoke words that made her chest ache with joy. When he said, "You may kiss the bride," Eli tipped his hat back and kissed her gently, reverently, like she was the most precious thing he'd ever held. The townsfolk cheered, but Margaret barely heard them. She had come to this town as a stranger, humiliated and alone. Now she had a husband and a life she'd chosen.
Like, share, and subscribe.